There is a country that cannot sell its oil freely, cannot access the global banking system, cannot trade normally with most of the world. A country that has been sanctioned, isolated, and economically squeezed for decades. And yet, that same country has developed a strategy so precise and so economically calculated that it keeps the entire global oil market in a state of permanent low level fear. That country is Iran. And the most important thing to understand about Iran's strategy is that it was never really about war. It was always about oil and about who controls the price of it. To understand Iran's strategy today, we need to understand what Iran actually is beneath all the headlines and the geopolitical noise. Iran is not a small or weak country. It is a nation of nearly 90 million people. It has one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. It sits on the fourth largest proven oil reserves in the world and the second largest natural gas reserves. In any other version of history, Iran would likely be one of the wealthiest and most economically powerful nations on the planet. Instead, it has spent the last 4 decades cut off from the global economy in ways that would have collapsed most other countries entirely. The story of how Iran ended up here begins in 1979. Before that year, Iran was actually a close American ally. The Shah of Iran ran a pro-Western government that gave American and British oil companies generous access to Iranian oil fields. The Iranian economy was growing, Western investment was flowing in. Iran was being positioned as the anchor of American strategic interests in the Middle East. Then the Islamic Revolution happened. The Shah was overthrown. American embassy workers were taken hostage for 444 days. And the relationship between Iran and the Western world shattered in a way that has never fully healed in the decades since. What followed was an almost unbroken sequence of economic pressure. Sanctions, more sanctions, tighter sanctions. Iran was cut off from the SWIFT international banking system, which is the network that allows money to move between countries. Iranian oil exports were repeatedly targeted with restrictions designed to reduce them to zero. Iranian businesses found themselves unable to access international capital markets. The Iranian rial, the national currency, collapsed in value so dramatically that ordinary Iranian citizens watched their savings lose most of their purchasing power within months during the worst periods. And yet, Iran did not collapse. It adapted. It found workarounds. It built relationships with countries willing to buy its oil quietly outside official channels. It developed a domestic military-industrial capacity that no amount of sanctions could reach. And most importantly, it identified the one lever it could pull that would send shockwaves through the global economy without firing a single missile directly at anyone. That lever is geography. Look at a map of the Middle East and find the narrow strip of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. That strip of water is called the Strait of Hormuz. It is at its narrowest point only about 33 kilometers wide, and through that 33-kilometer gap flows approximately 20% of all the oil traded in the entire world every single day. Every major oil export from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar passes through the Strait of Hormuz to reach the rest of the world. There is no alternative route that can handle anywhere near that volume. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most economically critical choke point on the surface of the planet. Iran sits on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz for its entire length. This is not an accident of geography that Iran tolerates. It is the foundational strategic asset around which Iran has built its entire economic and military doctrine for decades. Iran does not need to actually close the Strait of Hormuz to exercise enormous economic power through it. It only needs the credible threat of being able to close it. That threat alone is enough to keep oil markets nervous, keep insurance premiums for tankers elevated, and keep every government whose economy depends on Middle Eastern oil quietly factoring Iranian intentions into every policy decision they make. But Iran's geographic strategy does not stop at the Strait of Hormuz. Over the course of decades, Iran has systematically built relationships and, in many cases, directly funded and armed proxy groups positioned near every major oil-producing region in the surrounding area. In Yemen, the Houthi movement, which Iran supplies with weapons and financing, sits directly adjacent to another critical shipping lane called the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which roughly 10% of global trade passes. In Iraq, Iranian-aligned militias operate near some of the largest oil fields in the world. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, which Iran has funded for decades, sits within missile range of Israeli infrastructure and regional shipping routes. In Syria, Iranian military presence provides a land corridor connecting all of these elements into a single coherent strategic network. What this means in economic terms is that Iran has essentially constructed a distributed system of pressure points around the global oil supply chain. No single one of these pressure points by itself is enough to cause a catastrophic disruption, but together they form a web of potential disruption that is always present, always costing the global economy in the form of risk premiums, elevated insurance costs, and the enormous military expenditures that the United States and its allies must maintain in the region simply to keep the web from tightening. This is where Saudi Arabia's oil fields enter the picture directly. Saudi Aramco, the Saudi state oil company, operates the largest oil processing facility on Earth. It is called Abqaiq, a single facility located in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, and that single facility processes roughly 7% of the entire world's daily oil supply. In September 2019, drone and missile strikes hit Abqaiq directly. Saudi Arabia's oil output was cut in half overnight. Global oil prices spiked by the largest single-day percentage jump in history. The attacks were claimed by the Houthis in Yemen. American and Saudi officials attributed them to Iran. The economic shock from a single facility being hit for a single day reverberated through global markets for weeks. The Abqaiq attack was the moment the world fully understood what Iran had spent decades building. Not a conventional military capable of defeating American forces in open battle. Iran is not trying to win that war and never was. What Iran built was something far more economically sophisticated, a permanent, credible threat against the infrastructure that keeps the global economy running. The ability to make the cost of confronting Iran in purely economic terms potentially higher than the cost of tolerating Iran. This calculation shows up in hard numbers every single time Iranian tensions rise. When Iranian-linked forces attack tankers in the Gulf, oil prices move. When Iran announces advances in its nuclear program, oil prices move. When American naval forces and Iranian Revolutionary Guard vessels come into close contact in the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices move. Each of these movements represents real money flowing out of the global economy and into the accounts of every oil-producing country, including Iran's rivals. But they also represent a constant reminder to every government on Earth that Iran holds a hand in this game that cannot simply be called away. The nuclear program itself, which dominates Western media coverage of Iran, is in many ways a secondary element of this economic strategy rather than the primary one. The nuclear program serves as a negotiating chip, a deterrent, and a constant source of the uncertainty that keeps oil markets pricing in an Iran risk premium. But Iran does not need a nuclear weapon to exercise its core economic leverage. It has been exercising that leverage successfully for decades through conventional means. The nuclear program amplifies the threat. The geography and the proxy network are the actual mechanism. What makes Iran's position uniquely difficult to resolve through conventional economic pressure is the asymmetry at the heart of the situation. Sanctions hurt Iran's economy enormously, and the suffering of ordinary Iranian citizens has been real and severe. But sanctions have not and cannot remove Iran's geography. They cannot move the Strait of Hormuz. They cannot eliminate the decades of relationships and infrastructure Iran has built across the region. The economic weapon Iran holds is built into the physical map of the world in a way that no financial measure can reach. So what is the actual economic lesson of Iran's strategy? It is a lesson about the difference between conventional economic power and structural economic power. Conventional economic power comes from having money, having trade, having access to global financial systems. Iran has very little of that. Structural economic power comes from controlling or threatening something that the rest of the world cannot function without. Iran has an enormous amount of that. Every time you see an oil price spike tied to Middle Eastern tensions, part of what you are paying for at the fuel pump is the Iran risk premium, a tax on the global economy that has been running continuously for over 4 decades. Paid not because Iran is economically powerful in the traditional sense, but because Iran is positioned in a way that makes the cost of ignoring it higher than most governments are willing to accept. The global energy transition that is currently underway, the shift toward electric vehicles, renewable energy, and reduced oil dependence, is in the very long run the only development that actually neutralizes Iran's core strategic leverage. When the world no longer needs 20% of its daily oil supply to flow through a 33-kilometer strait, Iran's geographic chokehold loses its economic teeth. That transition is happening, but it is happening over decades, not years, and until it is complete, the economics of Iran's position remain exactly what they have been since 1979. Uncomfortable, expensive, and stubbornly resistant to every conventional solution the world has tried to apply to them. Understanding how oil geography shapes global economics is not just an academic exercise, it is the hidden explanation behind fuel prices, inflation, military budgets, and foreign policy decisions that affect every person on Earth. This channel exists to make those connections visible and understandable. Subscribe so you are ready for the next one, because the next video connects everything you just learned directly to what is happening in global energy markets right now.